Hello everyone, good morning. Thank you for joining us on another section today. Favor Anyam, and we say welcome. So for today, our topic for today's section is the hackers' blueprint, network attacks, and exploitable. So you'll be learning things like the common network attack vectors, exploitation techniques using real attacks, practical simulations in a safe lab environment. That's Hack365 Global. So if you're joining us for the first time, you will need to create your account on Hack365 Global to be able to access the labs for this section. First of all, you will need to create your account on sitecacademy.com. Then you'll be able to use that login credentials you just created on hack365global.com. So kindly visit sitecacademy.com to create your account now to be able to access the labs for this section. Finally, for questions, kindly drop your questions in the comment section if you are joining us from the live section. And then for physical participants, kindly note your questions down. You'll be attending to at the end of this section. So, okay, one more thing. If you do not have access where by the time you log into the hack365global.com, kindly send us an email at info@hack365global.com or send a message on the WhatsApp group if you're on the community group. Send us a message. So right now I'll be handing over to our facilitator for today, David. Do enjoy the section. You're definitely in for a treat. See you at the end of the section. David, please take over.
All right, everybody. Good morning once again, and you're welcome to today's session. And our topic for today is going to be the hacker's blueprint, which we're going to be looking at network attack vectors and exploitables. So, yeah, we'll just begin right up front. Yeah, our objective for today is, first of all, to understand what network security testing is. Also, we want to establish the basic difference between penetration testing and red teaming, which we also spoke about last week. Also, understanding target environments, client-server architecture, and also the use of essential tools like prop suites and other development tools. Now, by way of introduction, what is network penetration testing? So, this is a simulated cyber attack against the computer system, network, or a web application to find security weaknesses that an attacker could exploit. So, it is a simulated attack conducted against the computer network infrastructure. The primary objective of a network cyber attack is to proactively identify and exploit security vulnerabilities within the network. So, its devices, like the routers, switches, firewalls, and also connected systems, which could be servers, workstations, or applications. So basically, relating to networks, a cyber attack against the computer system is basically streamlined towards proactively identifying and exploiting security vulnerabilities within the network or a computer network infrastructure, which comprises of switches, routers, firewalls, servers, workstations, and applications. Now, unlike a simple vulnerability scan, which merely identifies known weaknesses, the network penetration test actively attempts to exploit those vulnerabilities to demonstrate the real-world impact of a successful attack. So basically, when you perform a vulnerability assessment or a vulnerability scan and then you're able to identify vulnerabilities, probably with the use of tools like Nikto, Nmap, or the likes. And then this gives you a breakdown of the number of vulnerabilities that could be found on an infrastructure. When you're running a network penetration test, your aim is to attempt to exploit those vulnerabilities in order to demonstrate the real-world impacts in the case of a successful attack. Now, this process helps the system understand its security posture from an attacker's perspective. Also, how to assess the effectiveness of their defenses and prioritize remediation efforts to strengthen their network security. So basically, the aim of exploiting those vulnerabilities is to demonstrate the real-world impacts of those things in the case where an attack is successful, meaning you're basically posing as an attacker and you're proving to whoever is in charge of the infrastructure or the risk attached to those vulnerabilities there in case of a successful attack. The reason for this is to make the system understand its security posture, the standing, and the effects of those vulnerabilities if taken advantage of or if they have been exploited. Now, all of these are done from an attacker's perspective. So you're trying to assess the effectiveness of the defenses of the infrastructure, and the aim of that definitely overall is to prioritize mitigation and remediation efforts in order to strengthen the security of the network. Now, what are the purposes, or what is the purpose of this kind of activity? One is to access security controls and identify weaknesses. So, the reason why we do penetration tests on network infrastructures or security assessments in network infrastructures is to access the security controls on the network and identify the weaknesses that lie on those networks. Also, to understand the attack surface of a network. So basically, you want to understand the topology of the network. How does the network behave? How does the network respond to certain things? So that would establish the surface for an attacker and entry points and exit points for the attack or the hackers, basically. Also, one evaluates the effectiveness of patching and configurations. We want to test the reason why we mitigate and remediation, and want to ensure that every mitigation strategy is actually addressing the vulnerabilities that lie on the tests. This is because those tests don't just happen once, they happen over time. So as much as you remediate tests upon remediation, this serves as a way of evaluating the effectiveness of your remediations or your patchings and the likes. Also, we want to be able to meet compliance and regulatory requirements, and also prevent unauthorized access and data breaches. Now, so what are the types of network penetration testing? So network penetration testing are divided into a number. First of all, we're going to be looking at the external network penetration testing. Now, in this form of penetration testing, your targets are internet-facing assets, likes of public IPs, firewalls, servers, and VPNs. Then you, on the other hand, you simulate an attacker outside the organization. So in a case like this, your focus is going to be on open port and services, exploitable vulnerabilities, weak authentications, and also web applications that happen to be hosted on those networks. So this is basically you hacking the infrastructure without zero knowledge. Hence, it is called an external penetration testing, because you're simulating an attacker that is outside the organization. So you have zero information, you have zero access to the internal networks and the likes. So based on those criteria that seem to put you in a black box scenario, it's called an external network penetration test. Now we have the internal network penetration test. Now this simulates an insider threat or an attacker who has breached perimeter defenses. Now, in a case like this, you have access now to, you're given access to the internal network, probably either through a VPN or probably through a physical meeting or a physical means, where now you're simulating an insider threat or you're simulating an attacker who has breached perimeter defenses. Your targets here are internal servers, workstations, switches, database, and majorly the aim of this kind of activity is to context privilege escalation and lateral movements. So in cases like this, you find yourself interfacing with databases and infrastructures like Active Directories, where you're looking for how you can either become a domain administrator, how you can dump credentials and move laterally across the whole domain and the network, and if possible, become an administrator, depending on your level of skill. Yes, we also have a network segmentation test. This focuses on ensuring proper isolation between critical systems. For example, we have the production and guest networks. Now, what are the phases of a network penetration testing? First, we have the planning and scoping. Now, in this phase, you want to define your goals and your objectives. You also want to identify in-scope IP addresses, domains, and systems. This is because some IP addresses, as much as they happen to be on the network, they can be termed out of scope, meaning you do not have authorization to test on those particular addresses or to carry out any form of activity on those addresses or systems or domains. So when you're in the process of planning and scoping, you want to identify what is in your scope. And also you want to agree on the rules of engagement. And then lastly, you want to determine the testing type, which is either a black box, a white box, or a gray box, which takes us back to the external penetration test, the internal penetration test. So, in your black box, you're simulating an attacker basically. Then, furthermore, you are giving either true information or giving full information, depending on the requirements of the test. Now, we also have the recon phase, which is also known as the information gathering phase. Now, in passive recon, you're basically collecting information without interacting directly with the target. So you have a target, for example, an IP address, and then you're performing a passive reconnaissance or a passive information gathering exercise. You want to use tools like checking for the records, using the domain name servers, using open source intelligence tools like Shodan and the likes of them. So you're basically gathering information of the target without you necessarily interacting actively with the targets. Now, on the other hand, active reconnaissance involves you performing network scans or you interacting with the target actively. Now, when this happens, you discover you're going to be performing network scans in order for you to identify open ports, live hosts, services that are running, and also operating system fingerprinting. Now, all of these exercises put together give you what we call the active reconnaissance. Reason being that you're interacting with the system or the infrastructure actively. So when you type, for example, nmap and an address, you're engaging the target to perform information gathering, so it becomes active. But when it's passive, you're not necessarily engaging the target. You are just gathering information from open source intelligence. We also have tools like mass scan, Let's Discover, and Recon NG. Now, here it says network reconnaissance is the first step, most times in network penetration tests. This allows attackers to map the target's attack surface. It involves discovering live hosts, open ports, and services. to identify potential vulnerabilities. Now, which I will explain prior to now, that in your active reconnaissance, you're aiming to discover live codes, open ports, operating systems that are running, and then sometimes you can even get vulnerabilities that belong to the services that are running on the application. Now, in active host discovery, we have tools like the Net Discover, AppScan, also ping, which is the DHCP protocol, ping and IP. This uses, I said, the SNMP protocol. So this is a form of active host discovery. Now, for example, when you have a command that tells you Net Discover R192.168.56.0/24, this scans the subnet for devices that are responding to app requests. Now, this can be defined as an active reconnaissance because we are using the Net Discover tool and the IP address of our targets. Now, what's scanning with Nmap? Nmap is the primary tool for discovering open ports and services. Nmap is the primary tool for discovering open ports and services. Some of the commonly used flags in Nmap include in SC, which is the default, which gives you the default NSA scripts. In SV, known as service version detection. O, which is known as, or which is used for operating system fingerprinting. So, as discussed earlier, Nmap gives you the variety of commands to run, ranging from the likes of comprehensive scan, aggressive scan, a complete TCP app scan, SYN scan, whatever scans you're trying to run. Basically, you're using Nmap to discover open ports and services. Now we'll move to enumeration of vulnerability scanning. Now, in this stage, we're trying to identify versions of services and possible misconfigurations that are aligned to those versions of services. Now, you want to map trust relationships and network shares, which involves you enumerating for users on a particular network, probably through the SNMP protocol, and tools like NM for Linux helps with things like that. You want to scan for known vulnerabilities. I'd actually use Exploitation, which matches the version of a protocol that is running. So, for instance, you have FTP that is running FTP 1.1.1. There might be CVE that is the one that is used, or that can be the level of misconfiguration for that particular version of FTP. So you want to scan for known vulnerabilities. So this happens basically in the version of vulnerability scanning phase. You use tools like the Nmap scripts, tools like Nessus, OpenVANS, NICT to SNMP clients, and as earlier mentioned, Linux. So it says enumeration is the process of actively probing the target system or a network to gather more detailed information than reconnaissance provides. So in reconnaissance, you gather information, but then in enumeration, you gather more information, leveraging on the information you've gathered in your recon phase. The goal is to identify live services, technologies, versions, and potential vulnerabilities that can be exploited later. But again, the goal of enumeration is to identify live services, technologies, versions, and potential vulnerabilities which could be exploited later. Now, in the case of web applications running on a network, enumeration is where testers often discover misconfigurations, outdated softwares, and vulnerabilities such as SQLite, cross-site scripting, directory traversal, and more. Now move to exploitation. Now in exploitation, we're attempting to exploit discovered vulnerabilities. confirm and discover vulnerabilities, so looking at how to exploit them. Example, attack vectors, you have the likes of exploiting unpatched services. For example, you have a service MS17-010, which is vulnerable to the eternal blue exploits. We also have weak and default credentials on SSH, RDP, and FTP. We also have man-in-the-middle attacks, non-encrypted traffic, likes of the HTTP protocol. We also have SNMP brute force and sensitive information. Now for this, we have tools like Metasploit framework, Hydra, Hack365 exec, Responder, Exploit DB scripts. Now, if we go back to our enumeration definition, it tells us that in the case of web applications running on the network, enumeration is where testers often discover misconfigurations, outdated software, and vulnerabilities such as the SQL injection and the likes of them all. So most times you have networks that have web applications running on them. And one of the entry points for attackers might be through, most likely, often happens through the web applications. It is a field for us to exploit post fields and likes where we test for things like command injection, most likely command injection. The aim of this is for us to find how we can have an entry point into the network. So in cases where command injection is found to be a vulnerability on the web application, this often results back into us getting access to the internal network through injecting malicious scripts that will give us a shell on our listening device. So the web application gives us an opening for us to probe and discover levels of misconfiguration and vulnerabilities, which we can use to gain access to the internal network. Now we have the post-exploitation phase. Now, in this phase, we are basically accessing the value of compromised systems. So here we attempt to perform privilege escalation, either local or domain administration access, by reverting into other machines via compromised source, extracting sensitive data, and establishing persistence. So in privilege escalation, we're trying to see how we can establish our privileges, either through leveraging on SUID binaries or sometimes CVEs based on the level or based on the version of the service that is running on the application. So certain CVEs have been discovered and have been patched up in such a way that they use scripts, like, for example, a program written in C that gives a regular user root access by probably compiling the CVE itself based on the version that is running on the application. Take, for instance, we have a Linux, or let's say Debian 1.1.1 running on a system that you've already compromised. So you've compromised the system, you're just a regular user now, you're cutting a shell, and then you're looking at how to escalate your privileges. Then upon enumerating the system that you've compromised, you discover the version that is running. Let's say it's running a Red Hat 1.0.0, and then you enumerate once again, and then you find a vulnerability or a CVE that is meant for that version, Red Hat 1.0.0. Now you can download that CVE to the compromised machine, either through wget or whatever cases. You download the CVE and then you use that CVE, most times by compiling the CVE first, because we want to be sure we don't want to have dependency issues. So we compile all our CVEs first and then we run it. And then if it is correct, you discover you would have gotten root accesses or administrator privileges, depending on the case. In cases of Active Directory, you want to use tools like Bloodhound or PowerScript to perform lateral movements from all levels in the domain, from, let's say, a local user. Bloodhound gives you a visual representation of the topology of the network and how you can move depending on the privileges that are assigned to each of the users in the network. So take, for instance, you have 6 users on an active network, and then when you use a Bloodhound, discover user 2 has a certain privilege over user 1. Take, for instance, generic rights. Yes, privileges like generic rights or generic, or which leverages on the fact that that user can change the password of the other user. Now you use that as a pointer, and then that points you to changing the password of the next person. What you've done is you've moved laterally, because now you've compromised 2 users, and then when you compromise the second user, he has permissions to a third user, which the first user did not have as level of permission. So when you continue to climb up the ladder like that, that is how we begin to say we've escalated our privileges. So this happens in the post-exploitation phase. Now, pivoting to other machines where compromise, this occurs when you exploited a particular machine in test surface, which happens to be the one you have access to. And then you've exploited that, and then you discover there are internal networks on the network you have access to, which you originally don't have access to, but the compromised device has access to. So once you use the compromised device to exploit the internal machine, we can say you've pivoted. So that's how pivoting happens. Via using, so we say it's via the compromised field, because we're basically using the compromised network to pivot into other internal machines. Also, in this case, we want to find how we can extract sensitive data and then also establish persistence. This is optional depending on the rules of our engagement. Although establishing persistence is more of a red team engagement rather than a penetration engagement. So here we have tools like Mimikatz for animation, Bloodhound for visual representation of an Active Directory topology, PowerShell Empire or PowerScript for also Active Directory animation. And we have the in-packet tool, which is also used in Active Directories to see how we can exploit certain privileges, like get user experience, get user PSNs, DC sync, depending on the likes. Tools like in-packet also helps you with actions like performing Kerberos attacks and targeted Kerberos on certain users for privilege escalation. Now, after successful exploitations, attackers aim to maintain access, escalate privileges, and pivot internally. Now, we look at the concepts of reverse shells. So, most times you want to deploy blind or reverse shells. So, one of the ways of deploying shells are the primary way, which involves using shells, PHP reverse shells, and whatever the case may be, depending on the language that happens to be used on the web application. Because now when you're uploading and leveraging the web application, so you use tools like MSF Venom to develop the shell, China Chopper or visually. Also, platform web applications like Pearl Monkey, Pentest Monkey, web shells give you reverse shells that you can use. It gives you a library of shells that you can use depending on what you're looking for. And also looking at managing the shell, you want to interact using browsers, netcat, and reverse connection. And after that, you want to stabilize the shell with Python 2 terminals. Now, privilege escalation. Now, maybe try to escalate privileges. What we're trying to do is discover SUID binaries and misconfigured cron jobs. So here we exploit weak permissions and exposed config files. Tools like linkage, PSY, sudo error gives you a list of permissions and files that you can use to perform privilege escalation. So, for example, the sudo -l gives you a list of all the contents on, gives you a list of the permissions that exist in a particular directory. Now, harvesting and reusing credentials. Yes, you also want to extract database credentials from config files. Look for the env files, WordPress configuration PHP files, settings of PHP files, .py files, and try installing credentials on other systems. So, for instance, you could be extract data from extract passwords, usernames from the system, and we want to use that to test on other systems. Now, finally, we want to look at common network vulnerabilities found during the penetration testing. So, right off, we have open or unnecessary ports and services, outdated and unpatched operating systems or softwares, weak default or reused credentials, insecure network protocols like FTP, Telnet, and HTTP, improper firewall and ACL configurations, lack of network segmentations, unsecured SNMP configurations, and poorly configured VPNs or exposed RDP services. So, when tools like Nmap, you can often find open and unnecessary ports and services. Nmap also helps you with identifying outdated and unpatched operating systems or software. Now, when it comes to logins, we have weak default or reused credentials. We also have insecure network protocols like FTP, Telnet, and HTTP, which are insecure by default and can be broken further in the use of the Nmap command. Improper firewall and ACL configurations, lack of network segmentations, unsecured SNMP configurations, and poorly configured VPNs or exposed RDP services. So that concludes the theoretical session for our session, the theoretical piece for our section today. Right now, we'll just move into our labs and look at the number of labs for today before we call it a session. Now, for our labs, we're going to be taking two levels, intermediate and the advanced levels. So we're going to be looking at the networking 2, 3, 6, 7, 8. And then we're going to take a look at the final lab under defensive operations. So right now we'll just head over to Hack365 and we move to networking under the intermediate level. So head over to Hack365 Global.com and to login. I'll start with the intermediate steps. And now networking. So let's begin right here. Task for this is to use an item config to view and modify network information on Linux. Okay, so we have information for us to use here. Just increase this. Okay, so the objective of this lab is to learn how to use config to view and modify network information on Linux. Purpose of the ifconfig is a system administrator utility in Linux operating systems used for network interface configurations. It's a command line interface tool and is used in the system startup scripts of many operating systems. ifconfig is the equivalent of the ipconfig tool used in Windows. For this lab, we're going to be using Linux tool. Now, we'll begin by viewing the help information screen by repeating the following command: ifconfig -h. It says open a terminal and begin. Open a terminal to begin and type ifconfig to view your network information. As you will see, there will be a lot of information, including your local IP addresses. New Linux distributions now have the ifconfig command installed. In this case, you can use the IP address command. So right now, we'll just move to our we can go to this side by side. So we can see that it's connected to you. We were told we can view the help information screen by repeating the following command: ifconfig type ifconfig -h. You have a list of information here. Here it says usage ifconfig -a-v-s interface. We also have an option for networks, addresses, tunnel addresses, and whatnot. List of possible hardware types. We have the local loopback, sleep, serial line IPs. Also list of possible address families, and a bunch of information now reproduced right here. Now, on the terminal, say open the terminal to begin and type ifconfig to view your network information. Type ifconfig. Okay, we have a list of our networking information here. We have this adapter, and you can see the IP address to be 172.18.0.1. So I have a netmask address of 255.255.0.0, and we see the broadcast address right here. Okay. We also have another adapter here, which is for the Docker adapter here with an address of 172.17.0.1. So this tells us that is the address belonging to that adapter. And then we have the regular loopback adapter, also known as the local host, 127.0.0.1. And then I have my network adapter or my wireless adapter. It's the address 192.168.100.7.100.12. And check properly, we can also see another address right here, which should be MAC address, to have another one below. And then we can see the broadcast address of that same adapter. Now it says to display a short list output, we can use the following command: ifconfig -s. So type ifconfig -s. Type ifconfig -s.
Are you correct with any flow? Third?
Type ifconfig -s.
Yes.
Type ifconfig type of configuration first
Those are the examples.
would have you can see that is shorter, very shorter list right here, and then this, of course, gives us a list of all the interfaces that are present. So you can see there's a match between this interface and the interface right earlier on, and also the Docker interface, the loopback interface, and wireless interface. Although this doesn't necessarily tell us the addresses of the adapters themselves, but you can see that we have a shorter list for what is right here. So the first task says we can display information about this specific interface by using the following command: ifconfig and the. Now, let's take, for example, our loopback interface. So if we type in ifconfig, the interface name is LO. If we just type in L4 here, it gives us information on just this interface. Of course, we can see that it is up into running, and we can find the address itself here. Now, we also have ifconfig. Let's try our wireless network. Wireless network. And then we see that we have information on this stand alone. So this, which is my wireless network, is what I'm going to put the IP addresses that is used to access the internet for operations and the like. Now, it says this is useful for determining interface information and for debugging purposes. Now, our fourth task here says we can disable and or enable network interface using an ifconfig flag. For example, ifconfig -0. This command will disable our local connections to Wi-Fi card to enable it either the following. To enable it, the following command: ifconfig and it's not up. Now, I'm not going to be running this command because this is going to disrupt the live stream, but we can try this for another adapter. Let's type in ifconfig and so I'm not going to get to switch off my local network, my local network. Let's try for the Docker 0. And this is also not permitted. Oh, yes, I think this works for just our wireless network. But doing that would switch off the internet connection, which we can't do for the sake of this session. Now, this fifth task says we can use ifconfig to enable malicious mode on an interface. This will allow the interface to receive all packets on the network. So most times you would need a compatible network card for this to work correctly. So you can just type in ifconfig, but not promiscuous. So if you try ifconfig, now note that the VLAN not and Ethernet 0 are the same thing, just the names are just different. Promiscuous. Let's try something. Let's see. So now this is done. Now I said if we want to view only TCP connections, we need to add the affinity parameter. So let's just stop this. Clear it and type in affinity. We're going to be creating and see if we can get just TCP connection. And then it tells us these are TCP connections. On the left hand side, you can see that we have the TCP written above the table right there. And it says similarly, if you want to view only UDP connections,
and add the actual new parameter to it. I hope it makes sense. So we can just do that, and then we have results for UDP connections, and then it stops by itself because it's done with what it's supposed to do. Now we can combine and operate multiple parameters in a single command as follows. Let's start -nt. Now, what does this do? Let's look at what happens. Let's start nt. Okay. Now it says it shows our local IP address and port number for each of the connection, which is right here. So we have our local IP address, which is also the address assigned to our wireless network, and the port number all connections are running on. The field, another field shows us our remote IP address and port number for each connection, which happens to be this, which tells us foreign address, second one, and then the third section tells us the TCP or UDP status for each connection. So it tells you a connection is either established or it's closed. So we have closed with connections. Type it again. Okay, this makes a better output. So we have all of this here, TCP connections. Then we see right here that we have the state for yes. If something is closed, it means it's closed. For example, it's a TCP connection that enables that you have to perform what is called the three-way handshake for every connection like that. Now, if it's closed, it means the connection was failed. Yes, closed. Now, if it's waiting. Now, we believe NetStat performs its scan per time. So the way ping sends packets for every 0.11 milliseconds, 0.22 milliseconds, that's how NetStat does the same thing too. But in 0.11 milliseconds, we're expecting to get feedback. If I don't get feedback, I don't know if it's closed or it's open. Call it a time wait. But if it's closed, we are sure that it's closed. Does it make sense? Okay. So, we also have a number of that's where it tells. So we also have like a note to represent all of the states that we just looked at. Okay. So it says if it's listing, it says represents a waiting for a connection request from any remote TCP and port. Now, a SYN sent represents after having a ping request, or after having sent a connection request. A SYN received represents waiting for a confirming connection request acknowledgement after having both received and sent a connection request. Now, when it's established, it represents an open connection. Data can be delivered to the user, and the normal state for data transfer phase of the connection. Now, we have a FIN-wait state. Represents that it's waiting for a connection termination request from the remote address or remote TCP or an acknowledgement from the connection termination request previously sent. FIN-wait 2 represents waiting for a connection termination request from the remote TCP. And it's closed wait, it's waiting for a connection termination request from the local user because it's closed. Closing represents waiting for a connection termination request acknowledgement from the remote TCP. Last ACK represents waiting for an acknowledgement of the connection termination request previously sent to the remote TCP, which includes an acknowledgement of its connection termination request. Time wait represents waiting for enough time to pass to be sure the remote TCP receives the acknowledgement of its connection termination request. Closed, which represents no connection state at all. Now, let's start allows us to view only connection which are listening. You can do this by typing netstat ntl. So if we type netstat ntl, we do this, and then we have an address for, and then if you notice, all of this are in their listening state, meaning I have my loop back or my local host listening on 7070. I also have something listening on here. I also have something listening here, something listening here, as well as here and here. So, this is interesting piece of information. Let's see if we try this. This page not found. Means it was listening though. But to take me somewhere. Okay. This didn't send any data, but it is listening. All right, no problem then. So, we also have a command that can view the kernel routing table by using the following commands. Let's start -r. This tells us the routing table of we have a routing table for each of the interfaces that we have right here. So for example, we have our wireless network. Its destination is default. Its gateway is 192.168.100.1 and the gen mask of 0.0.0. What does it mean? The gateway is more like the middleman. So the adapter has an address, but it has a destination that you're trying to get to, but then it needs a gateway, something that it can pass. So if you'd observe, the gateway is always similar, or it's always the first on the series of the IP addresses. So if you have a network that has an IP address, an adapter that has an IP address of 192.168.56.100, its gateway is always going to be 192.168.100.1 because it has to have a gateway, which is always the first. If we go back and type ifconfig, you notice that our address is 192.168.100.4, but it uses a gateway of 192.168.100.1. But this has to be its gateway, and then its destination is anywhere because you're actually accessing anything on the internet. It has a default destination.
Or BDB, or I mean, the the outside itself, but I think the land.
So even if it's still a LAN, most times the gateway is always the first in the series, the first IP address. So you have a range of 10.10.0.04/24. The gateway is 10.10.0.1. That is the gateway. For any other ones, most times you discover the IP address in now starts from 10.10.0.2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's because it has assigned 0.1 to be the gateway.
So you see that would like now, just as just like normal connected to the router. So let's assume you're not checking, then you now see gateway IP. Is it accurate for you to assume that that would be the router?
No, the gateway IP is not the router.
It's not the router.
It's not the router. Okay, so we can also make netstat shows the process IDs and where they belong by using the following command. Netstat -20. So this shows us process IDs and where they belong to. And do that one more time. We have all that we saw before and where they are coming from. So we see that there is something running right here on this particular port 57006. But then by the time we check where it's coming from, we see that it's from any desk. So it means any desk is the owner of that process on that address, on that adapter. Basically what it means. So, we can display high-level statistics by using the following command: netstats hyphen. So just that netstat hyphen, and this gives us a bunch of information also. This high-level statistics. So all in all, we're able to get an overview of netstat as a tool for printing network connections, routing tables, internet statistics, masquerading connections, and multicast memberships. Now, we were able to identify how to use netstat to view all active connections, display both local and foreign addresses in numeric IP form using the end parameter, used nmap to view only TCP connections, used nmap to view only UDP connections, combine multiple parameters in a single command to show both our local IP address, remote IP address, TCP and UDP status of each connection. I was able to define some parameters that we got from our analysis of the results we got, like the listening, the scene sent, scene received, established, fin rate 1, fin rate 2, close rate, closing, last act, time rate close. We're able to also view only connections that are listening using netstat. We're able to also view kernel routing table by using the following. And then netstat FMTNP, netstat TNPE, blah, blah, blah. Now, here we see that 0.0.0 in the local address column indicates that all IP addresses are listening. Right here, says that all of the IP addresses are listening. So it means both public, private, Docker, all the adapters are listening on that particular port. That's why it's highlighted to be 0.0.0. So it means whatever you can access on that port using the local IP address, you can also access it using a public IP address or using whatever the case is. So type complete. We've solved. I said this lab. Now if we go back to we have 6, 7, and 8. We move to 6, 7, and 8. So let's just quickly look at this. This is your route. So it's using route to display network information on Linux. Okay. This route is used when you want to work with the IP kernel routing table. It's typically used to set up static routes to specific networks or hosts via an interface. It is used for updating or showing the IP kernel routing table. Now, you can use Linux for this command definitely. In order to use routing, you need to install it. It comes with a package called NetTools and can be gotten on Linux using the following command: sudo apt get install NetTools. I have this installed already, but we could still run sudo apt get install NetTools. And as you can see, it says 0 upgraded, 0 newly installed, 0 to remove, and 775 not upgraded. So once this is installed, we will first view the help screen using the following command: wow h, and then you can see the help for this. See the help for that, which is supposed to give us an overview of a list of commands on that particular application. Let me check if this meeting is still. Now we'll use a simple command to do our IP kernel routing table. Type routes. Let me type it properly. And when we type this, like we saw before, gateway is this. From here, we're listening on this interface, and our destination is default. Now, to make it more explanatory, let's connect to the OpenVPN on Hack365 and view the routing so you can understand. Type cd download. If it's here. Yeah. So we have one of the VPNs here. So you can just download the VPN from here and hit the download button and get the VPN. Hack365 Global.com. So if we connect to sudo open VPN, where is it? User.ovpn. User is using 1, 2, 3, 4. Now that I've connected to if we zoom in. Now, before connecting to the VPN, we had this as our route. We had this as our route. So we saw that we had just 4 network adapters that were up and running. Now, first thing, if we type in ifconfig, which we just covered, we discovered there's an extra adapter now. This adapter, which is the adapter that the VPN is using. Now, if we type in routes, now, if we type in routes, what did we see? We notice now that there is another adapter, and then this tells us what's the name now? The information on the adapter. And now we notice that, like we mentioned before, the gateway on the adapter is 10802, 10801. So that's the first, like I mentioned, the first in the series. You notice the adapter address itself is 10.8.0.2. But that's where it starts from. Starts from .2. This is because .1 has to be gateway. So now route tells us how the network moves, the route it takes. So what it means is the destination for this adapter is 10.10.0.0, meaning the destination is all the networks on that 10.10.0.0, all of the networks there. But then the gateway it goes through is 10.8.0.2. So 10.8.0.1. That's the gateway. Exactly. Yes. Similar to trace route. Trace route. That's another tool entirely. But this tells you, okay, so most times when we want to troubleshoot why something is not working, for example, a VPN setup, trying to troubleshoot why it's not working, you want to understand the routing, if it is actually routed properly, use a tool called route. Okay. Let's keep asking. So it says If you want to display the previous routing table in full numeric form, you can always do r -n, then of course we have found previous routing table that was used before the present connection that is currently up and running right here now. Now, it says we can add a default gateway by repeating the following command. So, take for instance, you're setting up and then we're unable to set up the gateway from the configuration itself for an adapter. It is possible for you to add the gateway yourself from here. So route add default x x x x x. So you notice that this is going to be the gateway you want to give it. Let's say 10.10.0.1, 192.168.56.1. This should be the gateway for everything you're doing. So this assigns a gateway through which all packets that do not belong to the networks are forwarded. Now, to view the kernel's routing cache information, you can use route cn and route cn. Okay, so we do not have any cache information currently. So the cache is used to route packets faster. This command will print all saved cache information. Then we can specify to reject routings to a specific host or a network using the command this. So it means that similar to disabling the ICMP protocol on a particular network, which is responsible for allowing you to ping the network. When you ping a network, it sends ICMP requests. So you can be connected to a network, and so long ICMP is disabled, you won't be able to ping that network. So similar to doing that, you can also use routes to reject incoming connections from a particular gateway. So that way, if you attempt to ping that address to tell you the network is unreachable, even though you're connected. So yeah. So yes, even though you're connected. Yes, yes. So if we want to get the details of our IP routing table, we can use the following IP route. So what IP route does, IP route gives you a holistic representation of what happens up here. What I mean is this. So now, this is more self-explanatory. Why? Now, it tells you, look at the first line. It tells you, well, on the last column or the first column, we have the destination. It tells you it goes to the default via this gateway. That is the what's the name? That's the adapter there. The ones are in green. Now, for the VPN, which is our tune, not our tune O or tune 0 that we are using, you notice that it appears twice on the second column and on the third column. This is because it's telling you how the VPN is working. Telling you that, first of all, the VPN is running on tune O and it is using this particular address. It is connected to that address, or that is the address of the VPN itself. Then on the second line, it now tells you that 10.10.0.0 is the destination via the gateway that comes through from the first address. So basically, the VPN gives you an address, but then the address is now used to tunnel into another network. what IP route is doing, IP route is telling you how it's working. Exactly. So with something like this now, you now know that okay, there are networks under this subnet that you can access under the 10.10, whatever case network that you can access. So if you ping one of our test machines 10.10.10.0.6, sorry, 10.10.0.6, you see that we're able to ping it.
For the one I talk now, really like you're not anonymous, because you can always tell your everyday too.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Talks like this. Around monitoring the client, so we really able to see all of it.
Definitely. So in some instances, you may wish to delete the default gateway, which can actually by running route delete default. So this would lead to some malfunction in the internet connection, and important for a state to know the default gateway before executing this command. So we do not want to do that. So to get the output in relation to IPv4 and IPv6 formats, we can use the command IP-4 route. So if we do IP-4 route, this gives us the addresses in the IPv4 format, which is regular. Do this in 6. It gives us a different format for the addresses. So less informative, yes, definitely. So tell us what kind of route is the route command used to set up? What kind of route is the route command used to set up? The lab address. So basically, we know there are two types of routings. You're either having a dynamic routing or you have a static routing. Now, when you use dynamic routing, that's where principles and operations like DHCP comes into play because it becomes dynamic, and DHCP is one responsible for assigning of the addresses. And then in cases where you want to have static routings, as cases where you want to assign an address to a particular device or something that shouldn't change. So you want that address to be static. So in cases where we're using the route command to set up, probably gateways and the like, what kind of routes are we trying to set up? Having looked at having identified that we have dynamics and static routes.
Now, are you supposed to command specific to this route command?
Yes.
So,
Huh? Okay. Why do you think it's dynamic?
So, just from your good explanation, you said the route command is used to check the routing from as it connects to a VPN. That's from what I heard. From what I do. Check the routing from how the device is connected to the VPN, and how the VPN is now connected to the service and transfer. So, reason why I'm saying this is dynamic because I don't really see assigning any address. I think it's VPN that does this. IP address that is used to
Okay, so from our admin, we saw that the route command can be used to add a default gateway by executing the command. So we saw using the command route add default gateway blah 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 blah. To replace the X's with your gateway's IP, you can assign a static gateway address such that packets move through that particular network or things that are not on that network are forwarded, depending on your case study. Can also use the route command to reject routing on a specific network, something specific. We can also use it to get details and the likes. Now, basically here, as long as we can, as much as we can use the route command to navigate and enumerate, we can also use it to assign gateways. Now, when something is dynamic, it means it doesn't change. It means DHCP, for instance, DHCP can give you an IP address of 192.168.15.100, and tomorrow it's giving you 192.168.17 or something else. That's because it is dynamic. And but when it is static, it means it does not change. And when you're assigning a gateway, the gateway does not change. So that is for one. And then we discovered that most of the routings that we have here, VPNs, whatever the cases are, they are static VPN, they are static addresses. What a VPN does is gives you an address on one of its subnets. No matter how dynamic you think it is, it's not going to be giving you something that is not in its subnet. It is still static because it's a subnet that was defined in the VPN. Exactly. So it means that when you're using the route command, you're setting up static routes, not dynamic routes. So let me just type in static routes. Okay.
Hello.
Okay, so okay. So 6, 7, and 8. So look at 7, networking 7, and now we're going to be learning how to use scanless to anonymously scan a target. So scanless is a tool that can be used to scan a target anonymously. Now, we need a tool called PIP. Download this tool you have already installed, but have to install PIP. So we could just firstly clear this. Now we would view the help screen by typing scanless. Let's see.
Using Python package.
Yes, sir. No stress me now. No stress me. You can see Python 3 PIP. So, this is scanless. Seems like this is an old tool. This is an old tool. Yes, most likely. This tool is now out of. Okay, so all right. Since this tool is old, we might not be able to do this because Linux doesn't have it as part of this. And proposing anonymous spot scanning map gives us the flexibility of doing that with Nmap. We don't necessarily have to scan this. We'll just move on to the next.
So usually now that's been the way function of that being used to. Now if it's scanning, we could change it with it of just trying to map it out.
Actually, there's no scan that is anonymous. Actually, there's no scan that's anonymous. You can just be stealth enough.
Avoid
Not necessarily to avoid some. When you're performing a scan, what you're doing is you're performing How scans work is to actually establish a connection. That is what happens when you scan a network. So you don't just scan and it gives you results. What happens is tools like Nmap, when you perform an Nmap scan on a particular target, Nmap establishes connections with those targets. That's how Nmap is able to tell you this port is open, this port is closed. The reason is because it has established a connection with that target on that particular port, and it has confirmed that it is open. So when you perform Nmap, the target knows, quote unquote, have been scanned. But what happens when you do Nmap is you perform something called a TCP scan, or what by definition a TCP three-way handshake. So for sake of being anonymous or being stealth, you might customize your scan not to be a TCP scan. Maybe just a SYN scan. So in a case where you perform a scan where you send a SYN flag and then it tells you, it gives you back a SYN ACK flag, and then you now respond with the final ACK flag. In a case where you are trying to avoid, where you're trying to avoid firewalls and the likes, can just perform just SYN scans. That way, it sends a SYN scan and it leverages upon the SYN ACK flag it gets. It doesn't send an ACK flag back. So that way, you can still, to a reasonable extent, be anonymous. But then if you dive in deeper, you discover tools like Nmap might not suffice anymore. So you can even use the other means of interacting with target applications, tools like Netcat. Also, you can also use Netcat to interact with an application. So some applications are you can't use Nmap to actually scan some applications. So you can interact with them with Netcat instead. So that way is more anonymous than using Nmap.
What makes Netcat more?
Because Netcat is a listener. Is a listener.
Okay, listener.
Netcat is a listener. So sometimes you can try, if it's a web application that is running on a particular network, but you perform an Nmap scan and the host is unreachable, you can use Netcat to interact with the application over port 80, and then you get a response. Then you are sure that there is a web application running on the network. So depending on the port. Netcat is a more stealthy way of interacting with, stealthy and anonymous way of interacting with targets than Nmaps and the likes. So move to this lab, the DC DNS information, DNS NM. So for this lab, we're going to learn how to gather DNS information on targets using DNS enumeration. DNS enum is a tool used for locating of all DNS servers and DNS entries for a target. DNS enumeration is an important tool to have as it allows us to gather critical information about the organization, such as usernames, computer names, IP addresses, etc. Now, DNS enumeration comes pre-installed with Linux, but we'll look at the help screen, typing DNS and of course the help. Then you have a whole lot of information. So we can use the enumeration flag to enumerate. We have a private flag. We also have the variables like we have for the rest of them, which we covered before. So for our targets here is going to be Google. So to perform a comprehensive DNS enumeration on the site, we just use DNS enum. And then because we are trying to enumerate, like you see from our help here, and just perform enumeration in google.com. And then can gather information and then takes time because we're going to be giving us a comprehensive information. So it says this will perform a comprehensive information gathering scan on the domain google.com. to provide us with information such as different host IP addresses, name servers, mail servers, subdomains, and will even attempt some domain takeovers. It will also perform automatic brute forcing of some of the most common subdomains such as admin.google.com and provide you with this information. This is very useful information as it gives you a better idea of the attack surface of a target. So we have this here, taking time. So let's try. Okay, let's try another target. Okay, let's just view DNS enumeration. Let's say facebook.com. And see, tells us a number of name servers on our target. So we have, for the mail servers, we have smtpgoogle.com, of course, and we have the IP addresses right there. Then it's trying zone transfers and getting bind versions. So for facebook.com, it has gotten a number of mail servers right here. This found one mail server, which is smtp.vvv.facebook.com on this IP address. We also have a number of zone transfers and bind versions that it's trying currently. So basically, when we're using this tool, comes in quite handy because it helps with a level of comprehensive information gathering on a domain. So it checks for the domains, subdomains, servers attached, mail servers. It can even attempt brute forcing for setting on the mail server, for setting usernames, servers like names like administrator, the user, generic names that exist on the mail server, attempts to brute force on all of them, and then gives you all of those information which will be useful for whatever case, whatever listings. There's an error scrapping subdomains from Google. Interesting. So that basically explains the purpose for that particular tool. So we can complete for this. Then okay, we have a final lab on offensive operations. We target application theoptrics. So we just head over to offensive operations on the advanced. We head over to our advanced category. Find offensive operations here. Then this theoptrics. And check this. So the objective of this lab is to gain root for administrator, whatever this is. Okay. All right. So it says exploiting remote network services on Theoptrix. That's the title of the lab. So for the tools, you have to have a Theoptrix machine up and running. And there's a download link here for everyone. So it's posted on Hub. Just go to that particular. So the aim of this lab is to give students practical experience in network serving enumerations, identifying vulnerable services, and exploiting them to gain root access on a misconfigured Linux server. So you can just download from here. One of this. Just close this, and then you host it on your virtual box or your virtual machine. So the objective of this lab, by the completion of this lab, you should be able to perform host discovery and identify the target's IP address. Use Nmap to enumerate open ports and running services. Identify vulnerable services such as Apache with mod SSL, OpenSSL, Samba, leverage non-remote code execution exploits to gain a shell, escalate privileges to gain root access on the target system, understand the importance of patching outdated services. So now, this the scenario for the lab. A Linux server is running on an internal network. It is poorly maintained and contains known vulnerable services. Your task or your mission is to approach the server as an attacker would discover the target machine, scan for open ports, and identify services and versions, find known vulnerabilities, and remote exploitation, gain foothold, and escalate root privileges. This lab emulates early 2000s style remote exploits, teaching students how attackers targeted unpatched Linux servers. Now, topics that are addressed here include host discovery and network mapping, banner grabbing, and service version enumeration, identify vulnerable SSL implementations, remote exploits usage, establishing a remote shell on the system, performing a local privilege escalation after gaining a low privilege shell, understanding the risk of outdated software on servers. The tools we have Nmap, Netcats, exploit database, OpenPop.c, and Metasploit framework, which is optional though. The objective is to obtain root access on the machine, show a proof of compromise by submitting the name of the user, whose name starts with H. Okay, so first things first, we're going to be starting our machine. And okay, so let's clear all of this and sorry, disconnect from the VPN. Also clear this. I want to cancel these terminals and then just focus on one. So first things first, we want to perform. Okay, so I want to perform a net discover. We want to discover the IP address of the machine on our internal network, and then from there begin our various scannings and the likes. So first things first, we want to do net discover. Now, type in ifconfig to find an adapter for the Ebox net, which is the adapter our internal machine is currently hosted on. So we can run a comprehensive scan to discover a list of addresses and networks that are currently running on that adapter. So we can identify the IP address of the machine itself or our target server. So if we do net discover interface vbox net 0, which is this. Type in enter, what must be root. So do this with this sudo command and
Be able to get the details of the vulnerable one because we need to subscribe to the app.
well, you'll be given access.
We'll be giving access.
As once, have you logged in? Have you registered?
Yeah.
Okay, you'll be given access shortly. So we have these machines to currently be on. So if we split our terminal vertically, so we zoom into okay. So enter the collapse this of terminal. If we just cancel this, This, can you see? If we just do this and then we try to ping one of this 192.168.100, if this works okay. So 120.111, both work. So now we want to perform an nmap scan on them to know which of them is our target machine. So could just do 100 and then plot this horizontally. Okay, so it appears to be as though just trying to make this very much seen. Appears to be as though this is not our target because it shows filtered ports and the host is up, but we can't access anything on it. So let's try our other target, 111. If we do that, we should be able to gather reasonable information on our target. Then we just wait for, okay, so upon doing this, we see that we have SSH up and running on our target, which is understandable. We also have this currently running on our target. We also have this running on our target. We also have SMB running on our target. We also have Apache running on 443 also. So seeing that it's a network, we're going to be leveraging on these protocols, see how we can gain access to the machine itself and find exploitables therein. So, okay, so first things first, we know that it's running a web application, so let's just check that out. The 192.168.56.111. We could just check for 192.111. Okay, and this is what we have currently here. This is a test page. So this page is used for test operation of the Apache web server. You now add content to this. Okay. So it means we don't have much information on the web application itself. We don't happen to have much information, just running something. Okay. What we could do, the version, we could check if there is an exploit for the version of Apache running there. So we just do this.
Before going to the IP itself, was to check what we're trying to confirm.
So,
Like before, when we went directly to the IP of that web page,
yes.
the server, so what were you trying to achieve?
Okay, so from our nmap scan, we found out that it's running a web application from port 80 and also for port 3. So, I mean, one of the first steps is to enumerate. So we want to know what is going on the web application itself. So in this case, you just find an Apache, meaning there's no actual activity going on the web applications. But on actual real world networks, you might find actual web applications that will now determine the pathology to your attack. Because most times, if you have a web application that is public facing, you might want to check for things how you can inject commands, command injection, and then find the reverse shell from there. Because we find an application that is up and running and leverage on vulnerabilities on the application to gain external access. But now that we have an application that is not necessarily running much information, means that we'll have to leverage the protocols or the versions of the protocol that are running on the application, not the application itself. So that was the reason why I went to the application first. So this is just remote. Okay, let's see. Apache. This is this is a Windows, and this is not what. So this does not answer what you're looking for. Okay. Remote buffer overflow. Okay, so but this is a Unix hat. This is a red hat. It would work, but most times buffer overflows are quite tricky because buffer overflows have ability to crash infrastructures. So, okay. Okay, so what we could do, let's take a pause on that and look at other protocols. We have SSH. SSH would need credentials to log in, which we do not have. I think we are stuck with some SMB. We can try a GNOME for Linux to see if we can gather information. 192.168.111. Then see if we can gather anything more. Okay. So we don't seem to get anything interesting here. If it's an SMB, I'm trying to get the SMB version. That would give us a peek into what we are looking at. Because from here, we have limited information. We just know that it's SMB Samba SMBD. But we need to know the version itself for us to know what particular exploit we can work with. That's amazing. Let's check. Server message block. SMB. Yeah.
Okay. So that captures the response from the server.
Yeah. So SM exactly. Server message block. That's what SMB stands for. So for other infrastructures, we might be able to get usernames from enumerating the SMB shares on the application. We're seeing we can't find anything interesting here. We just have groups users. We don't have juicy information that could lead to anything interesting, such as names of users or names of whatever the case is. All we can do is we can use Metasploit to find the version of the SMB. So if we type in MSF console, you type in MSF console and just type our Metasploit. Okay, so Metasploit has started. Metasploit has started, and it's interesting. Not finding anything on the name for Linux. Okay, so it started already. What we can do is we can just search for, we're looking for the version of SMB, so we can just search for SMB and version. So here we have a bunch of frameworks, and we're looking for one that scans for the version of SMB. So this exploit SMB net no, this is not it. Here we have this SMB, this not it. Okay, I think we have this kind of SMB version detection, right? So we can use this scanner to scan for the version of the SMB on our target. So if we just use 103, 103, we just use 103, and then review our options. It tells us to set the target host, which is our target machine. So if we just set our host to be 192.168.56.1. If we set that, if we confirm that, let's type in run your exploit. What did you say? As well, host could not be into it. Okay, I think we've seen it. So we have this. We have Samba 2.2.1a to be the version of our SMB. So I think we can now check for CVEs or exploits on this. So we can just use that guy exploit DB, and then what do I see? Okay, so there is an exploit, remote buffer overflow. Again. Okay. So this confirms that there is a valid exploit for this thing. So we can use another tool though. We could use another tool. We could use search exploits.
You have the version.
Yes, we could use search exploit. Okay, let's check for our Apache. Because this Apache looks like something that should be running. Looks like something that should use 2.4, this is not 0.1. Yeah. Now, okay, so let's just go back to our SMB. We had Samba 2.2.1. Okay, so we have Samba 2.2.1. Okay. We even have something on Metasploit. Saves us stress. So it tells us we have this, and then we have remote execution, and then we have the remote overflow. So means there is a exploit called chance to open overflow Metasploit. So if this works, this should give us maybe a Metasploit or a shell that we can use to gain access, and then that we should be able to solve the lab. So to do this correctly, so chance to open. So we're searching for chance to open overflow. So can go to Metasploit. Let's just go back and search for chance to open overflow. Which one is it again? Yeah. This one is OS X. So I think working with Linux, there should be this one. We should use this one. Can use number one, right? This is on a Linux system. If we are on a Linux system, we should use the Linux system. Okay, so let's just go ahead and use. So we'll just use what one. So no payload defaulting to blah blah blah. Okay, so let's check for the options. Then we have we set our R hosts. Yeah. So we set our R host, our target to 192.168.56.111. Yeah, thank you. So if we do that, type exploit. Let's see. Taking so much time. Okay. I think I know why it's not working. So if we go back to our options, there is something called a listing address, which is where I'm supposed to be listing from. And this is set to my public address. But in the case where I'm working in the network, I want to listen through my own adapter, the network adapter itself. So remember, if we go here and type ifconfig, we have this guy. So this is what I'm supposed to be. I'm supposed to be listening on the gateway, basically. I'm supposed to set this to 192.168. So I'm supposed to set L host to 192.168.6.1. Yeah. So we must work. So let's see if this works. Sim is dying. So what could be the reason? If it's dying, all right, so something happened when we ran this. Initially, it said no payload configured. It's defaulted to this. Let's just use the default shell and see the default shell. Maybe that's why because it's saying a Metapita session closed. Probably Metapita is failing. Let's set the payload to generic shell underscore reverse underscore TCP. So this has been set to okay. I think it's yes, I think our exploit ran. I think it's ran. Oh yes, it did. So now we are root. I'll be able to capitalize on the SMB2. So let's check what is in this. Nothing. Okay, so if we just see the etc Okay, bunch of things here. Let's see. Let's cut password. Have bunch of okay roots. Okay, so you see that there's a user John somewhere. No, there's a user Harold. What else? I think that's pretty much it. So there's an FTP. But there's FTP running on the application itself. So okay, that's fine now. Let's check the user. Let's be home, sorry. Let's go home. Okay. Howard and John. What is in Howard? Oh, John. Certificates. Nothing is there. Okay. Okay, let's do it. Command. Perfect. Okay. So check the okay, so let's check this red hat release. We've actually exploited the machine. I
Just taking one second.
yes. So let's just red hat lineup release. Okay, so this the task for our lab. It says what your objective is to access show up the name of the
Arrow.
yes, it's as simple as that. Okay. So we were able to solve the lab. This took us a while, but yeah. So that's been solved, and so basically that's all we have for the practical session for today. And then so we're able to cover quite a number of things. Starting from NetStart to DNS enumeration, IF config, route commands, and so there's some other things. And the lab we were to upon, we were able to identify how to use exploits, common CGEs, and common versions of applications running on network services like so. I mean, with this, we've come to the end of the session as regards the topic for today. So we'll continue from here next week in time. Thank you very much. Questions. It's time for questions.
This is a weekly something. For today's birthday. Very Saturday.
Questions.
Do you think that was specifying the
Online
last
participants.
command and the payload?
Yes,
But
sir.
you just created a random file and redirected it, or that was the only thing that you started.
Huh?
The last command you used
Yes.
when you created a file or you redirected it to
Okay. Yeah, I redirected it to use a regular reverse TCP shell because for more indications,
Mm.
when we run the command the first time, when we set up the exploit, what happens is when you use an exploit, when you're trying to gain a shell, so you have an exploit and a payload, they work together. So what is the exploit? The exploit is what gives you entrance. But the payload is what happens with the exploit. So think of it like you want to rob a house, the exploit is the door and you enter into the house. But the payload is what happens when you enter. Do you kill or do you steal? That's what happens. So when you're trying to get a share, because when you're in a network, infiltrating a network means you get in a share. That means you're having a backdoor access. So of course you have an exploit, which is the vulnerability that you found. But then the payload is what gives you that share. So the exploit can go through, but the payload doesn't work if you're using the wrong payload. So most times when we don't use Metasploit uses exploit and payload together. When we are doing it manually, sometimes Metasploit has a bank. Sometimes you don't want to use Metasploit, you want to do it yourself. Unless you're using command injection and you trigger the network. At the back end, what stands as a payload is your listener using Netcat. So Netcat is listening on, let's say, port 4444. And then the command you injected had the exploit that is supposed to trigger something on port 4444. So Netcat listens on that same port, and then a shell is established. Exactly. But now in this case, Metasploit has the exploit, which is a file itself. I'm sure if we try to trace this down, we will see the contents of this exploit because the exploit is a piece of code that was probably written in C from what I'm saying. No, Ruby. I saw Ruby, RB. PHP, I can't remember. It's not PHP. But the point is, there's an exploit, it's a piece of code. Now, Metasploit uses that piece of code to exploit the system. But then it needs a payload for it to actually give you a metapreter, or what Metasploit calls it a metapreter, we call it a shell. Yes. So when we run the code, when we use this exploit, it said no payload configured. It's defaulting to Linux metapreter reverse TCP. Exactly. So when we run this, and when we changed our IP and we did this the second time, something happened. It said the metapreter session closed, meaning it has attempted to create a shell, but it's closing. So my guess is it's from the payload, because it's not from the exploit. So I decided to use a generic payload. That was why I decided to set the payload to a generic shell reverse TCP.
You're not invoking your own.
Now, exactly, I'm invoking my specific payload. That was wow. Now it says command shell session opened. Exactly. So you see that it opens a session on a particular port on a particular machine. So it's 3277730. It opens on a particular port. Exactly.
This is recorded.
Yes, it's recorded, so you can always watch it. Yes, you can always watch it on YouTube over time. So yeah, that's it. Any other questions or any more questions from the online participants and any other person? Questions. Okay, so in the absence of no questions, in the absence of questions, you might just call it a day. Thank you very much. See you.
Hack365. So first of all, you have to create your account on skytechacademy.com. Then use the login details on Hack365. You've done that, okay. So you send your name. I don't know if you're on the group chat. The community group here. Okay. But you can give him your name. He will give you access. Then the link, if you check the live section, is in the description. So you see the link to the group. You can join. You have other questions. All right, we've now come to the end of today's section. Thank you for joining us once again. If you have any further questions, you can send it to the community group chat on WhatsApp. And if you're not on the group, the link to the group is in the description of this section. So you can always check it out and join the group. All right, don't forget to subscribe to get live updates of our sections. I think that's all for today. Thank you, and see you next week. Goodbye.